This word maker cities is kind of a new idea on the landscape. It's a combination of the maker movement, which is quite new, and of all of this reurbanization. So I'd like to explore that today and also look at how I think it's really an amazing act of renewal and excitement for our nation. You know, if you were to ask, what's a maker city, you might do something as simple as look at Nick Pinkston's blog and see what cities have hardware meetups that are doing new forms of hardware and making startups. And what you'd find is, in addition to New York and San Francisco, it's a lot of the old industrial core of our nation that is kind of coming together again. But other people are onto this. Next Tuesday will be the first White House Maker Fair. For President Obama and his team, there's something immensely hopeful about this. There's an expectancy of the Maker City that it will be about new forms of manufacturing, bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., the possibility that by working with our hands and using new technology, we'll be onto something. And it's not just kind of at Washington. The president, along with the National Association of Local Manufacturers, put out a call to 150 cities. How could you become a maker city? Whether by putting on a maker conference or by teaching people these skills, building maker spaces, starting local manufacturing, celebrating that. It's clear that this is a movement that could be broader and more inclusive than the initial tech movement, and there's great expectancy for it. But in addition to the economic side of a maker city, there's another notion. The Institute for the Future has a year-long project, and they're beginning to think that a maker city is much more about agency, civic innovation, contributing to the city. The fact that we have a great deal of technology and capabilities now where it's no longer you versus the government, but people can co-create. And this fall, in October, there will be a conference on that very topic. And San Francisco's really in the lead of exploring this. On Tuesday, San Francisco will be announcing kind of the most interesting project yet that brings citizens together with the city in actually making the future. And Neil from San Francisco Planning is on our panel today. Market Street is being redone in 2017, being torn up, being made more pedestrian friendly. And there's a formal project to engage citizens in rebuilding, break Market Street into 5 zones, 50 projects, 100,000 people involved, actually turning to the crowd to physically change the nature of city planning. All of this just beginning in the last couple of years, and yet there's something else against this background. Can a maker city be a just city? You know, we're in this narrative about 2 cities right now. New York had a populist revolution. Here in San Francisco, we see protests like this one all the time. So there's a great deal of responsibility on this. Can it be more inclusive and talk to a broader group of people than we did in tech? As I went about putting together this talk, I actually went to a number of cities to get a sense for what was going on. And I'd like to share with you a few of the trends that I found and a few of the reasons I think there are reasons to be hopeful, because the nature of this moment in time when we're moving from a digital revolution to a physical one, when we're going from bits to atoms, where we're able to actually make stuff and not just make sites, is a really different moment. Well, one thing I found as I looked at a bunch of cities is a maker city is a jazz city. A jazz city. It's about the unexpected combination of new ideas, material, and code. It is interdisciplinary and unexpected. It is jazz. It is what cities do. We're at a moment now where there's more stuff and materials to work with, and it clearly takes artists and people of all backgrounds to start figuring out how to combine this and make something new. And you know, jazz exploded for the first time on the scene in the 1920s, during the second industrial revolution. So today, as we reurbanize and spike innovation, it makes sense to be inspired by this most American of traits. And there's no urbanist greater than Wynton Marsalis, who wrote, "The real power and innovation of jazz is that a diverse group of people come together to create improvised art and negotiate their agendas. That negotiation is about the art. Jazz is about the individual performance and the demands of selfless collaboration," which is pretty good advice for a city. I went out to Brooklyn Polytechnic, where Professor Luc Dubois showed me how interdisciplinary things get. He runs the media program there. He's an engineer, but also a musician. He told me everything here is an and. Engineering and soft circuits, fashion and sensors, art and advanced manufacturing. I mean, you thought that the social media and digital revolution was something. Wait till people start combining and making things. And you know, this really is reinvigorating New York's sense of a maker city. New York was all about fashion in the early days, and it's being rediscovered now. Here is the Manufacture New York, a 40,000 square foot facility, part sewing, part incubator, part advanced manufacturing, part research and development. The best of our modern era kind of played out in a very maker way to create stuff in New York. And it's not just big stuff. Don't let anybody tell you shoes aren't made in America. There's Brooklyn Shoe Space, where people come in every day and play with this art and making and learning new things. And New York is home to other kinds of fashion startups. This is Collabra, a Berta-funded company, where people submit their designs and then make these things, right? So social media plus physical coming together in an urban space. I caught up with Nora, who is an entrepreneur, and I asked her, what is it that's changing just now?
I call it conspicuous production. So people moved on from conspicuous consumption to conspicuous production. They don't want to just purchase and consume mass-produced items. They want to have something unique, something customized. They want to see where does something come from. They want to know the origin. It's about origin and transparency. What's good about New York is that there's so many other industries that can actually subsidize you, or you can make a living and start something by the side and then grow into something bigger.
Another thing you find in New York, or in Brooklyn, or in Oakland, or in Pittsburgh, is the reclaiming of old spaces, often World War II spaces, being purposed for vibrancy today. It's something that was just under the radar, and now it's all over the scene. The Brooklyn Navy Yard is an amazing example.
New York City has been working to redevelop the Brooklyn Navy Yard, bring it back to life, recreate it as a home for good-paying industrial jobs.
What I have seen in the last 10 years is just mind-boggling. A lot of local, state, and federal dollars have been poured into the Navy Yard's infrastructure to make it what it looks like today.
What you have is manufacturing the traditional sense of making things, but it's being combined with high-end design, with new technology, with art, woodworking, metalworking.
Currently, the Navy Yard has 275 businesses, and we've created about 6,400 jobs.
We're doing a project called the New Lab. We're creating spaces which will be shared by a whole series of innovative companies based around rapid prototyping, new manufacturing, and 3D printing. We're hoping just to become a catalyst that'll spawn a whole slew of different types of economic innovation.
Living in the neighborhood and seeing the Navy Yard coming alive and having job opportunities, I'm just excited.
For the city, these kinds of jobs are critical to creating stable middle-class communities.
Brooklyn is the place to be right now. It's coming up, it's coming up.
We think this making movement thing is new, but of course, making's been going on for a long time. And leave it to New York to be in the lead with this, the 1921 America Makes Exposition in New York. Now, you may be asking, why did they have a maker fair in 1921 in New York? And the answer was the social problems of that day had to do with people from all over the world pouring into our cities, from Eastern Europe and from Asia, and people who had been earlier New Yorkers. And whenever you bring new people into a city, there's social problems, and how do you resolve them and get people on the same page in some Tocquevillian way? And the answer was to celebrate diversity. The Italian lineage, the Yugoslav lineage. It was the maker movement kind of bringing people together and showing that you build social capital by bringing people together. And that's exactly where we are again today. So it is also true that I think that a maker city is one that is inclusive. It has a story to tell. Maker cities are learning cities because they play on their heritage. Every city may not have a digital history, but it definitely has a pluralistic manufacturing heritage that it can draw on. For example, Pittsburgh is an amazing case. Pittsburgh, when we thought of manufacturing, it used to be like this. I think it was Mark Twain who said that it smelled like Hell's Kitchen in Pittsburgh. But today, with a renaissance in manufacturing, manufacturing, it looks much more like this. And what we're seeing are whole new ecosystems grow. So Alpha Labs is a hardware startup, and they bring people in it's an incubator. They bring people in for a few months, and I asked them, do people leave? And they said people don't really want to leave. And what's interesting is it grows its supply chain. People stay. Capital's there, advice is there, local suppliers are there. Amazingly, supply chain grows in this kind of maker city environment. And education changes. There's so much power right now when we think of the cloud and capabilities that kids pick this stuff up. It's the reason that education is challenged so much. This is the Makership Project. It's a combination of internship and apprenticeship being developed with the Department of Labor, and it's aimed at people like vets and people who are unemployed. This is an ad for one of them that basically says, if you're unemployed, if you're looking for skills, come to Tech Shop, and in just a few weeks, we will give you the skills you need to go and do something. Here is Ezra, who was unemployed, lost his job, went and took classes in programming and sewing and Arduino, and it gave him a great sense of agency and kind of...
My name is Mark Roth. I'm the founder of the Learning Shelter, and basically what we're trying to do is take the learning and education model into the homeless shelters and make a deep impact on homelessness. I decided to create the Learning Shelter. It's a 90-day live-in program that takes people out of the homeless shelters and then teaches them the skills that they need in order to go out and find jobs. I found a community, it's called the Maker Community, and I became a part of it, and I learned as much as I could, as fast as I could. Between 6 months and a year and a half, I went from being homeless to being able to just barely support myself to founding and running a business that's actually doing quite well. We're going to go out and we're going to source people who need new skills, and we're going to bring them in and we're going to teach them those skills. They're everything from 3D printing to making t-shirts. When they walk out of the Learning Shelter, they're going to have the basic understanding of how to use this stuff to get a job.
So one of the things you find is that facilities that allow people to let them express themselves and let businesses start. Tummel, an incubator, Clara Brenner will be on our panel today, has incubated a company called WorkHands. Essentially, it's a LinkedIn for blue collar, for skilled people who work in the skilled trades. And it's exciting to see the tech world begin to respond to kind of people who are much more part of the manual world and treating that as an equal and seeing what's possible there. Maker cities also convey agency. This is this whole bit that people believe they can actually get things done, accomplishing things in a city. A really good example of this happened in Dallas. Jason Roberts lived in this suburb in Oak Cliffs, and he noticed when he went to Europe there was a streetcar. And in his Dallas suburb, there was none. There were just old tracks. And he said to the city, why don't we have public transportation? They say, we're a suburban car city. You don't have public transportation where you live. And so he created the Oak Cliff Transit Authority and said, we're going to get some people together. And the government said, no, don't do that. We're the Department of Transportation. You can't just make your own Department of Transportation. And then when funding fell through for another project in Dallas, it actually got built. The $30 million went to him, and it just proved that if you came together and started doing something, you could make a difference. I was so excited by this, I decided we needed the San Francisco Prototyping Authority. I would be a commissioner, and so would all of you. We would just simply go to the streets and start creating things. But that actually happened. A couple of years ago, the city, Gray Area Foundation for the Arts, Intersection for the Arts, created urban prototyping. And the idea was to take 4 acres, this development, and start imagining what might be built there. Because as the developer said, we could never come up with as many ideas as the crowd. We gave them access to Tech Shop and Autodesk, and a number of things came out. In San Francisco, it is illegal to put a car in front of a fire hydrant. But there isn't a law about putting a park there. So it turns out there were 10 miles of gardens that could be possible. People looked at what if we turned the steps into a musical instrument. Here is a project that thing, you held it, it took your heart rate, and it turned into the music. I thought it was clever. Mayor Menino in Boston thought it was so great, he ordered up several to put around Boston. One of the problems that we have is some of these buildings have large floor plates. They create kind of dangerous alleys. City planning doesn't like alleys because bad things could happen. The developer liked them. And all of these artists started playing with how might you light them up and change them, do creative things with alley space. That fed right into development. And as we'll learn in a moment, this is coming back in a big way in San Francisco with Market Street prototyping along 2 miles, engaging the whole city. And as Neil says, we have an opportunity to build the most vibrant street in America. This is what Market Street looked like 50 years ago. And it really takes citizens to bring it back. Another great example is a whole bottom-up thing. People who use tech products contribute to the city. Many of you know Waze, the transportation app. It's being used in Rio right now during the World Cup to solve transportation problems.
This place here is the crisis room, a place where we handle tough situations. The question is, when we enter the building, what is happening and where? We have here this important road, and people are complaining about heavy traffic. And then we see a picture. We don't only know that they are telling about it, but we can see that it's loaded.
We have the channel, we have the data, and we need to shorten the distance between the citizens and the city hall.
Brazil is an incredibly important market for us because they have a ton of users, and the more users we have, the better the data is. That means that we can not just save each individual time, but look at the city as a whole. And this is where we think the next part of our evolution really lies.
And finally, I think a maker city is a frontier city. You know, America loves a frontier. Our character's at its best when we're going west or finding something. It's our most orneriest when we don't have a frontier to discover. And whether it's a Brooklyn or Cleveland or even unlikely Las Vegas, as we're creating these new spaces, things are completely exciting. Tony Hsieh is taking downtown Las Vegas and investing $350 million in it. And he's actually using the same algorithm that Sandy Pentland talked about earlier. How can we actually measure the number of connections and collisions, the diversity in a city, to use that to build economic development? And in addition to creating startups there, they're beginning to focus on manufacturing. Factorly is a really interesting new startup. It's easy to build a prototype, but for most startups, by the time you have to build a lot of something, you have to go to China. Factorly aims to build 200 to 10,000 of something. The idea that if you have an idea, we can actually make it in the United States. That's a really interesting development. So when I look at all of this, I start thinking that a maker city really is, in a way, a beginning way of looking at the future. When I started looking at this project, I was looking at cities. But what I think I found was the American dream, reinventing itself with deeply resonant threads. If association is the mother of all science, as Tocqueville said, it's never been more true than in the 1,000 maker spaces and co-working spaces in America, where people come together in community to invent social as well as productive capital. The maker movement is really all about a sense of personal agency, liberty, and invention. It has Franklin written all over it. It's diverse, it's pluralistic, it's federated. I think Madison and Ellington and Ellis Island would all be at home in the maker city. I think it's an exciting thing on our horizon.